The salt spray stung Jonas Crow's face as he hauled in the fishing net. The rhythmic creak of the winch a familiar comfort in the pre-dawn gloom. 5 years since he traded black ops for black cod. The roar of gunfire for the groan of the ocean. 5 years trying to forget the op in the South China Sea. The faces of the men he couldn't save. The screams swallowed by the relentless tide. Crow wasn't his real name, of course. Just another layer of anonymity he'd donned to bury the ghost of the man he used to be. He'd bought the battered trawler, the Serenity, with blood money, a grim irony he couldn't quite shake. The quiet life was a lie, a carefully constructed facade. The nightmares still came, sharp and vivid, a brutal reminder of the skills he possessed, skills that refused to stay dormant. He checked the catch, a meager haul, another day, another dollar. As he sorted through the silver bodies, a glint of metal caught his eye, not scales, but a tarnished silver coin, clutched in the frozen grip of a deep-sea fish. An old coin, etched with symbols that sparked a forgotten fear in the deepest recesses of his mind. A fear he thought he'd left behind with the bodies in the South China Sea. The coin remained clutched in his hand, a cold weight against his palm. Later that day, back in his sparsely furnished cottage overlooking the harbor, a battered envelope slid under the door. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of heavy, watermarked paper and a single, antique key. The paper contained a frantic, handwritten note. Crow, if you're still out there, the Serpent is compromised. They're doing something wrong. People are changing. Please, before it's too late. Use the key. Cabin 313. Time is running out. The Ocean Serpent. Crow knew the name. A floating palace owned by the kind of people who made deals with devils, figurative ones at least. Men like Alistair Thorne, whose name was synonymous with corruption and unchecked power. What could they possibly need from him? He crumpled the note, his gut twisting with a familiar dread that he'd spent years running from this life. But the past, it seemed, had a way of finding you. He stared at the key, its intricate design echoing the symbols on the coin. A plea for help, a ship of nightmares, and billionaires dabbling in darkness. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that his quiet life was officially over. He burned the note, the acrid smoke stinging his nostrils. A futile attempt to erase the inevitable. Crow knew he should walk away. He'd earned his peace, hadn't he? But the image of Sarah flickered in his mind. Sarah Chan, the journalist who'd helped him expose a corrupt arms dealer years ago. The journalist who always had his back. The journalist that he considered as a friend. He hadn't seen her in years, but he knew she'd never send a plea like that unless it was dire. Then, the phone rang, a distorted voice, cold and mechanical. Crow, we know about the message. We know about the key. Stay away from the Serpent, or Sarah suffers. Understand? The line went dead. Rage, cold and sharp, replaced the reluctance. It wasn't just a sense of moral obligation anymore. It was personal. They'd made it personal. He glanced at the coin, the key, and the choppy waters of the harbor. He wasn't just going to investigate. He was going to tear that ship apart, piece by piece, until he found Sarah and made them pay. The fisherman was gone. Jonas Crow was back, using forged documents and a carefully constructed cover story. Crow, now going by Mr. Jones, boarded the Ocean Serpent as a newly hired security consultant. The opulence was suffocating: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and the pervasive scent of money and desperation. He moved with a practiced ease, observing everything, his senses honed by years of training. The passengers were a grotesque parody of wealth: vacant eyes, forced smiles, and an unsettling eagerness to please the ship's elite, the billionaires. Their behavior was off, almost robotic. The crew, too, seemed subdued, their usual cheerful efficiency replaced by a nervous, almost fearful compliance. He checked into cabin 313, small, cramped, and overlooked the churning engine room. Hardly luxurious, but it was a vantage point. He spent the first few hours observing security protocols, noting blind spots and access points. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The air thrummed with a subtle energy, a discordant vibration that set his teeth on edge. He saw glimpses of unsettling rituals in shadowed corners, heard whispers of ancient names, and felt a growing unease crawling under his skin. This wasn't just a ship. It was a gilded cage, and the occupants were trapped in something far more sinister than debt. The carefully constructed facade of normalcy shattered during the captain's gala. Crow was positioned near the grand staircase, scanning the crowd, when it happened on a seemingly ordinary passenger. A middle-aged man in a tuxedo, suddenly seized. His eyes rolled back, revealing bloodshot whites, and a guttural scream tore from his throat. A sound no human could possibly make that he lunged at a nearby waiter. His movements unnaturally swift and powerful. Crow reacted instantly, tackling the man to the ground. But this wasn't just a drunken outburst. The man's strength was superhuman, his grip like iron as Crow struggled to subdue him. He noticed the man's skin was unnaturally cold. Almost reptilian security arrived. But even with their combined force, they struggled to restrain him. Then, the man spoke, not in his own voice, but in a raspy, ancient tongue. The words were gibberish, yet they resonated with a palpable evil, sending shivers down Crow's spine. Before they could fully restrain him, the man arched his back, a sickening crack echoing through the ballroom, and his body went limp, dead. But the air crackled with a lingering energy, a malevolent presence that Crow knew, with a chilling certainty, was demonic. This was no accident. This was an infestation. The incident at the gala was quickly swept under the rug, dismissed as a medical emergency. But Crow knew better. He used his access to security systems to delve deeper, bypassing firewalls and accessing restricted areas. The key from the note opened more than just cabin 313. It unlocked a hidden network of passages beneath the ship, leading to a clandestine chamber deep within the hull. There, amidst arcane symbols etched into the steel and flickering candlelight, he found them. The billionaires, Alastair Thorne, the ringleader, chanted in the same guttural tongue the possessed passenger had spoken. They were performing a ritual, their faces contorted in a mixture of fear and ecstasy. Crow watched, horrified, as Thorne plunged a ceremonial dagger into his own chest. But he didn't die. Instead, his eyes glowed with an unholy light, and his voice deepened, resonating with unimaginable power. "The vessel is prepared," Thorne boomed, his voice no longer his own. Crow realized the horrifying truth. The billionaires weren't victims. They were willing participants. They were offering themselves as hosts to a powerful demon in exchange for immortality and ultimate power. A pact with the devil, made literal, and now, the demon was here. Thorne turned, his glowing eyes fixated on Crow, that a predatory grin stretched across his face. "Intruder, you shouldn't have seen this." With a speed that defied his age, Thorne lunged. Crow barely managed to dodge the attack, the force of it sending him stumbling back. This wasn't the Alastair Thorne he knew from the news. This was something else entirely. A demon in a billionaire's suit. The chamber was small, claustrophobic, offering little room to maneuver. Thorne moved with unnatural strength and agility, throwing Crow against the stone walls. Crow, relying on years of training, countered with precise strikes, targeting pressure points and exploiting momentary openings. He landed a solid blow to Thorne's jaw, but the demon barely flinched. Thorne roared, grabbing Crow by the throat and lifting him off the ground. Crow struggled, gasping for air. Clawing at Thorne's hands, he managed to kick out, slamming his heel into Thorne's knee. The demon staggered, releasing his grip. Crow dropped to the ground, scrambling for a discarded ceremonial dagger that he lunged, driving the blade into Thorne's shoulder. The demon shrieked, a sound of pure agony, but the wound seemed to heal almost instantly. This was going to be a long fight. The shriek of the demon Thorne seemed to act as a catalyst. The demonic influence, previously subtle, exploded across the ship. Crow fought his way out of the chamber, the sounds of screaming and chaos echoing through the corridors. The ocean serpent had become a floating hell. Passengers, their eyes glowing with malevolent energy, attacked each other with savage ferocity. The once pristine hallways were now stained with blood and littered with debris. The air thrummed with a palpable evil, making it hard to breathe. Shadows flickered and danced, taking on grotesque shapes. The very fabric of the ship seemed to warp and twist, reflecting the demonic corruption within. He saw a group of possessed crew members dragging a screaming woman towards the engine room. He heard the chanting of the billionaires, now fully transformed, echoing through the ventilation system. The ship's emergency alarms blared uselessly, adding to the cacophony of terror. Crow knew he couldn't save everyone. His priority was Sarah, but navigating this nightmarish landscape, filled with possessed individuals and supernatural horrors, would be a suicide mission. He needed allies. And he needed to find Sarah before it was too late. The ocean serpent was sinking, not into the ocean, but into the abyss. Fighting his way through the possessed hordes, Crow stumbled upon a small group huddled in the ship's galley, barricading themselves against the encroaching darkness. Among them was a grizzled, oil-stained engineer named McCready, who recognized Crow from his brief stint in security. "Jones, what the hell is going on?" "Demons," Crow stated bluntly. "They've taken over." McCready scoffed, then paled as he saw the seriousness in Crow's eyes. "Demons? You're serious?" Another figure stepped forward, a young woman with fiery red hair and a determined look. "He's right. I've seen things. Heard things. My name is Isolde. Let's just say I know a little about the occult." Isolde explained she'd sensed the demonic presence building for days and had been researching ways to combat it. McCready, despite his initial skepticism, was a resourceful engineer who knew the ship inside and out. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance: the ex-Special Forces operative, the skeptical engineer, and the occultist. Their odds were slim, but they were the only hope for the remaining unpossessed on the Ocean Serpent. Crow had his allies. Now they needed a plan. "They're trying to fully manifest the demon," Isolde explained, her voice tight with urgency. "The ritual is ongoing. If they succeed, this ship, this world, will be in serious trouble." "How do we stop it?" Crow asked, his gaze unwavering. "We need to disrupt the ritual," Isolde replied. "But it will be heavily guarded, and we need to find Sarah. I sensed her. She's alive, but weak, being held somewhere near the grand ballroom." McCready pointed to a schematic of the ship. "The ballroom is directly above the engine room. We can use the maintenance tunnels to bypass the main corridors, avoid most of the possessed." Their plan was risky, bordering on suicidal. They would navigate the labyrinthine tunnels, battling possessed passengers and crew, all while racing against time to disrupt the ritual and rescue Sarah. The ship itself was becoming an active enemy, the demonic influence twisting the architecture, creating illusions, and preying on their fears. They moved quickly, Crow leading the way, his tactical skills honed by years of combat. McCready used his knowledge of the ship to guide them, while Isolde warded off the worst of the demonic influence with makeshift sigils and whispered incantations. Every step was a fight for survival. Every shadow held a potential threat. The Ocean Serpent was a ticking time bomb, and they were running out of time. Reaching a small, relatively safe alcove within the maintenance tunnels, Isolde frantically flipped through her worn leather-bound book. "I've been researching this demon, Azazel. It's ancient, powerful, almost unstoppable." "Almost," Crow pressed, his hand resting on his pistol. "Every demon has a weakness," Isolde explained, her eyes scanning the page. "Azazel, he's bound to a specific artifact, a chalice, said to contain the tears of a fallen angel. It's the source of his power, his link to this realm." McCready cursed. "A chalice? On a luxury cruise ship? That could be anywhere." Isolde pointed to a symbol etched into the page, matching the one on the coin Crow had found. "This symbol, it marks the chalice's hiding place. It's not random. It's connected to the ship's original design, a specific location deemed sacred by the ship's architect." Crow remembered the ship's brochure, a detail he'd dismissed as marketing fluff. The ship's chapel. They advertised it as a replica of a medieval cathedral. "That's it," Isolde confirmed. "The chalice will be there, but it will be heavily guarded, and destroying it won't be easy. It requires a specific incantation, a phrase of repentance uttered by someone with a pure heart." Crow knew his heart was anything but pure, but maybe, just maybe, Isolde's was. Reaching the chapel was a bloodbath. Possessed billionaires, their bodies twisted and contorted, guarded the entrance. McCready, using his engineering skills, rigged a series of makeshift explosives, creating a diversion that allowed Crow and Isolde to slip inside. The chapel was a grotesque parody of faith. The air crackled with demonic energy, and the fully manifested Azazel towered over the altar, a hulking figure of shadow and rage. Sarah was chained nearby, barely conscious. "You cannot stop me," Azazel boomed, his voice shaking the very foundations of the ship. "This world will be mine." Crow knew brute force wouldn't work. He nodded to Isolde, drawing Azazel's attention. While the demon focused on Crow, Isolde rushed to the altar, grabbing the chalice. Azazel roared, swatting Crow aside like a ragdoll. He lunged for Isolde, but Crow, fueled by adrenaline and desperation, tackled the demon, buying her precious seconds. Isolde raised the chalice, her voice trembling as she began to chant the incantation. But her voice faltered, her eyes filled with doubt. Crow knew what he had to do. "Finish it, Isolde!" he yelled, drawing Azazel's attention. He knew this might be the end, but he would buy them time. Azazel turned his attention towards Crow. Isolde's voice, now clear and strong, filled the chapel. The ancient words resonated with power, and the chalice began to glow with an ethereal light. Azazel shrieked in agony, his form flickering, dissolving. The demonic energy that had gripped the ship began to dissipate, the possessed passengers collapsing, their eyes losing their unholy glow. With Azazel vanquished, Crow, battered but alive, helped Isolde free Sarah. The ocean serpent was in ruins, listing heavily to one side, fires raging throughout the ship. McCready, ever the resourceful engineer, managed to restore power to the emergency generators, activating the lifeboats. Crow, Isolde, McCready, and Sarah, along with the few remaining survivors, made their way to the deck. The scene was one of utter devastation. But amidst the chaos, there was hope. Crow, with his tactical skills and unwavering determination, organized the evacuation, ensuring that everyone who could be saved made it onto the lifeboats. He helped lower the boats into the churning sea, a grim satisfaction washing over him. He may not have been able to save everyone, but he had saved those he could. As the last lifeboat pulled away, Crow watched the ocean serpent sink beneath the waves, taking its secrets with it. Days later, Jonas Crow, his face etched with new scars and his body aching, stood on the docks, watching the authorities swarm the area, piecing together the fragments of the ocean serpent disaster. He gave a brief statement, using his Mr. Jones alias, carefully omitting any mention of demons or rituals. The official story would be a tragic accident, a mechanical failure. The truth was too unbelievable, too dangerous. Sarah, recovering in a nearby hospital, offered him a grateful smile. McCready, ever the pragmatist, was already looking for a new engineering job. Isolde, her eyes filled with a newfound understanding, simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the darkness they had faced. Crow knew he couldn't go back to his quiet life. The world was full of things that went bump in the night, things that required his particular set of skills. He still had the coin, a grim reminder of the supernatural world that lurked beneath the surface of reality. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, a ghost in the machine. He was no longer running from his past. He was embracing his future. Jonas Crow, Demon Hunter. It had a certain ring to it.